Turns out everybody has a unique tongue print, much like your fingerprints and ear prints. So scarily enough, I found this out because there's a bit of research done in China where they're investigating the possibilities of using tongue prints for biometrics. But that does raise the very real possibility that you might end up licking a cash point in order to get money out, or snogging away to the pay at a restaurant.
Raw pineapple contains a chemical called bromelain, which is actually very efficient at digesting flesh. They use it in the catering industry for tenderising meat, things like that. But it's also, because of its ability to digest flesh, it's also quite handy at dissolving fingerprints. So if any of you are wannabe burglars, or planning on committing some kind of horrible crime, if you soak your hand in a tin of pineapple chunks for a couple of hours beforehand, it will eat most of your fingerprints away, and thus you can get off scot-free. Cunning handy hint there. Anyway, yes, hydras are biologically immortal in the sense that they do not age, they do not experience senescence, the aging process. They're capable of regenerating their own cells by a process. Basically, it means they can regenerate from fairly serious injuries. It used to be thought they could regenerate from anything, but that's not true. But they can regenerate from fairly serious injury, and they don't technically age. We had a rock pool full of hydras. They're tiny little things, like a millimetre or two long at the largest. A little tube with some tentacles and stuff coming out the end. You have one in a rock pool with an infinite supply of food and no predators and an unchanging environment, it would theoretically live forever. Right, hands up those of you who think a Jaffa cake is a cake. Right, now hands up those of you who think it's a biscuit. I'm afraid you're wrong, it is in fact a cake, in the UK at least. In 1991 there was a tax case, surreally enough, because biscuits are classified as a luxury item, whereas cake is a foodstuff and therefore taxed at a lower band of VAT. UK Customs and Excise accused Jaffa Cake of making biscuits. Jaffa Cake said no, it was a cake, and the judgment came down in favour of Jaffa Cake, so Jaffa Cake is legally a cake. And that is because a biscuit is something that gets softer as it goes stale, the cake gets harder, and Jaffa Cakes get harder as they go stale. So there you go, Jaffa Cakes are cakes. In 1881, President John Garfield of America was assassinated. Now, not as many people think by the man who shot him. The man who shot him, they reckon that the bullet wound probably wasn't sufficiently serious as to actually prove fatal. They reckon he probably could have survived that. But what he didn't survive was the doctors. Never trust a doctor. He didn't survive the doctors because they were trying to dig bullet out, and so many of them were trying to dig this bullet out that they managed to eventually cause blood poisoning, septicemia, and he actually died of that from all these doctors digging dirty fingers and stuff in this bullet hole on his liver. Pleasant. One of the chaps who was trying to find it was actually Alexander Graham Bell, who was using one of the world's first ever metal detectors to try and figure out where the bullet was, but he reckoned it wasn't working and he couldn't find it, and he reckoned this was because the bed springs, the metal bed springs from the bed Garfield was lying on, were getting in the way and interfering with his metal detector.
Right, we have to be quiet because we're in a library, but it's worth noting that in 1896 Britain went to war with Zanzibar for 38 minutes because they put a king on the throne that we didn't like, so we sent in our navy and we sunk their only boat. Bombed the palace, and 38 minutes later they surrendered. Because it was the Empire and we were arseholes, we then sent them a bill for the shells that we'd used because they'd wasted our armaments. Empire, wonderful thing. Not.
No number in the English language contains the letters J or K, not a single one. The only number that contains a Z is 0, because it turns out a zillion is not a number, unfortunately. C first appears in octillion. Although, in the subject of things that don't appear in letters that don't appear in things, St John's Wood is the only London tube station that does not contain a single letter from the word mackerel. Important stuff.